none of the jazz standards are written by women. Most of the band leaders aren't. So you have patrons, presenters, radio journalists, all people that are coming now more to a consciousness around this issue. And I see it changing, so I'm extremely hopeful. But in 10 years, I would really like to not have to have an institute like this.
Welcome to Arts Engines. I am your host, Aaron Dworkin. And with us today as our guest, we have Terri Lyne Carrington, who serves as founder and the artistic director of the Berklee Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice. She's also artistic director for Berklee's Summer Jazz Workshop, co-curator for BAMS Fest, co-artistic director of the Carr Center here in Detroit, Michigan. And as if that was not enough, three-time Grammy Award-winning drummer, producer, educator, and activist, Terri Lyne. It is so wonderful to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. So nice to be here and nice to talk with you. And actually, I'm now the artistic director for the Carr Center, opposed to co-artistic director. I've graduated.
Hey, awesome, awesome. Well, one of our great Detroit treasures as well. So, and we're so excited for this show, which has been co-curated by Berklee College of Music and the Boston Conservatory, who really help us think through kind of how should we look at these topics, and of course, the opportunity to be able to invite you to come on as our guest. So what I thought I would do, and I always tell our viewers, check out everybody's bios. We like to kind of not go through a bio interview type of thing, but really delve into the issues. And so you, of course, lead the Institute for Jazz and Gender Justice. So I thought I would just start right off. And for all of our viewers, who might be wondering, what is an Institute for Jazz and Gender Justice?
Well, seeing as we're the first of our kind, I guess I'm still trying to define that myself. But basically, it's just a way to bring attention to this really, really big problem of gender parity in jazz, and also just in the music industry in general. But my focus is jazz because that's my background, and that's basically, where I make my living and what I teach. But it started off with just meeting with some students, some women students, that told me some stories that were just kind of shocking because I didn't grow up with the same kind of experience they did. And just from having this meeting, it really opened my eyes to seeing that these issues really needed to be addressed at our institution, but just in the field in general. And just because I had a very exceptional career and childhood, and was protected and kind of ushered into the jazz world by my father and other greats. I had a responsibility now to really look at the issue from without of my own perspective and try to do my best to, bring others along with me and to point out to my colleagues and comrades in the jazz world and mentors even that something is terribly wrong. And that's basically how we started it, just at the school. But what's happened is a lot of other people have asked us to partner and do different programming. And, a lot of other people are now really interested in this topic, which I'm very happy about because now I see more light at the end of the tunnel.
That's awesome. And so, and I want to kind of get a little into your background, more of your background in just a minute. But in terms of the Institute itself, so how does that now manifest that work? So in other words, there are clearly these issues relating to gender and jazz. What are the ways in which you address it? Are there different kind of focus areas or pockets or ways that you tackle it?
Well, the first way is just providing a safe, nurturing place for not just young women, but people from the entire gender spectrum to be able to learn the music. That's like the first thing, because there are transgender students that I didn't know were at Berklee that have found us, and a lot of young women that always feel this barrier, even in a classroom or in an ensemble, they don't feel as supported and nurtured. So even the young men that are in our program, because it's not just for women, um, but since these young men have gravitated to this program, the young women feel um, supported by them and not judged um, and not like they're being given opportunity just because they're women. They feel like they really have an environment to buckle down and try to learn this music, which is hard enough in itself. Um, and we also have a lot of guest artists that come in and give them lessons and lead ensembles, do composition work, private lessons. They come for a few days at a time. So I think that within a semester we might have 6 or 7 guest artists, which are great opportunities for the students, to learn directly from these masterful musicians. And then we do partnering with other organizations and presenting partners within the Boston area, but also outside of the Boston area. So we've done stuff in New York and DC, Monterey Jazz Festival. We travel Europe. So it's basically trying to address the problem from within our institution, but it also addresses it without.
Gotcha. And as you look down the road, like, do you see, like, if the Institute's work is successful, what would you like to see different in the field, say 10 years from now, that you would have been instrumental in helping to bring about?
Well, I think like one of the biggest problems is that it seems to me that people just say that they didn't realize that this problem existed. And it seems odd, but I can relate to it because I didn't as well for so long and I'm in it. So I think that just this awareness of, oh, right, there is something wrong with it. None of the music that we play, none of the composers are women, none of the jazz standards are written by women. Most of the band leaders aren't. So you have patrons, presenters, radio journalists, all people that are coming now more to a consciousness around this issue. And I see it changing, so I'm extremely hopeful. But in 10 years, I would really like to not have to have an institute like this. I would love for it to be a natural, just a natural thing that more women are playing. It's not going to happen overnight, but in 10 years' time, it would be great to see, more gender equality in our field, and not just in the performers, but also, with education, with teachers, with journalists, with scholars. So that's kind of, my goal in 10 years is to have helped contribute to that kind of equality. I mean, I also always say, if you go to a museum and you see nothing but works of male artists, you would think something's wrong. And for so many years, nobody thought anything was wrong, with what's happening in jazz.
All right. So you touched a little on, you've had this extraordinary opportunity and really was able to come into jazz early and have had just such an extraordinary career. What was that like kind of coming up? When did you kind of realize this is my thing, right? This isn't just, my family. This isn't just, this is now for me. This is mine that I really want to take on. Was there a moment that kind of happened for you?
No, I always felt ownership in the music. And that's the first thing that I try to, relate to our students, that this is your music. You have the right to be here. You have the right to play it. And it was hard for me at first to relate to people that didn't feel that way, because I've always felt that. But just to, kind of stand in your own authenticity, inside of the music is not easy for a lot of people. And also, I think so much of what we come to expect from a jazz musician is steeped in masculinity. So we have not fully accepted the feminine aesthetic, in the music. So I think that everybody has to start to listen differently. Um, and even myself, I've had to start to listen differently, and also look at my own playing, because I've always compared it to every other guy out there. So I had to be just as strong and just as, um, in touch with, my own masculinity to be competitive with them. And so now it's like a whole different way of thinking. It's transformational, really.
That's awesome. So we've talked about gender, but I also would, there are definitely people who feel that there are different racial issues that arise in jazz. And just wondering if you have thoughts about kind of the sense of race in jazz as it relates not just to performers, but audiences.
Sure. Well, as far as performers go, um, jazz education has gotten bigger and bigger as the years go on, and it doesn't that's an important part of developing young musicians. But I think before people were comfortable learning jazz in a school environment, there was just the regular way of learning, and the way of hard knocks, and having to just go out there and be mentored and get beaten up, by these great musicians, and you find out if you can sink or swim. That's kind of the way that it used to happen. When education came along, I think that so many of the young uh, Black students who didn't have the same resources couldn't study in the same way. They didn't have the same opportunities with programming in high school or junior high school. So what I found is jazz education has produced a lot more white students or white graduates, and I feel a bit of a problem. And with our institute, and also with the summer program that I do, which is for high school students, I've really been trying to make sure that I can look at potential. Sometimes, not just base everything off of merit. And, that's interesting and challenging when you're working at a college that awards scholarships to people based on merit and their ability. So, that's one thing that I feel has been a problem with the racial factor in this. As far as the audience, I mean, we've seen this happening with, all the Black music art forms, the blues, jazz, and even now hip hop. When something becomes popular or a success, generally it's often, because more white people are supporting it. So, and which is fine, but one of the things that I try to instill in our students is to really understand the history. Even the people that don't like jazz necessarily, or that are hip hop musicians or R&B musicians or gospel musicians, to not understand the connection to the blues that we all have, and to not understand. I look at it all as Black music, and I think we have to take, a different sense of pride and educate ourselves more on the foundational aspect of all of Black music. So, I often talk a lot about that with our students, and it's nice to see the light bulbs going off, and to be able to talk to white students about Black music and make them understand the foundation of it as well.
Awesome. If there was kind of one thing that you would want, young people especially, many of whom watch the show, to know about jazz, or to take away from jazz that they might not already think, what would that be that you would, be like, what, you may not be thinking about jazz like this, or it means this. What would that be?
Well, I don't think it's something that, I think a lot of people think that it's old and aren't really looking at the connections that jazz has with contemporary music, modern music. So, and that's been happening for a while, I think since the 80s. I think in the 70s, there was still so much, um, life um, to what would have been considered modern jazz. But somehow in the 80s, everything started going back to classic jazz or a certain kind of sound. These record companies that were creating um, young jazz lions. And it kind of directed the sound, and more experimental music was not being supported in the same way. Um, and I think, jazz musicians have always been contemporary, have always blended genres. Um, so I think you have to do a little more work sometimes to find that and to hear that, to figure out what your jazz is. Um, but it's there. And so I kind of have this discussion often sometimes with hip hop people that, feel like hip hop is the new black music, and jazz is, old. But
What do you tell them? What do you tell them?
well, I tell them the same thing I just said. Like I have a new band, Social Science, and one of the people in the band, guitarist, you can hear indie rock influence in his playing. The pianist, you can hear the influence of classical composers in his writing and his playing. Um, uh, the vocalist is from Haiti, and you can hear that influence. There's rap and spoken word on the album, so there's a turntablist in the band. So we definitely have some hip hop and R&B influence in there as well. So I think that the fact that this album that I just did actually won a Downbeat Critics poll of Best Album of the Year, and I won Best Artist of the Year, and that was really shocking to me because I kind of look at a lot of the critics as thinking about jazz a little bit, more from a traditional standpoint. So to me, it's a turning point because I feel that people are really starting to embrace the fact that jazz has has all these legs and arms like an octopus, and it can still be jazz if you have a hip hop beat.
Awesome, awesome. So you mentioned, which makes me think about, obviously you are active in terms of your recording, you're performing, you're doing all that, but you also have to do this administrative piece. And I know a lot of times, musicians struggle with, how do I balance these things, and what's my time being spent, and is one pulling me away from the other? Do you find a balance with that? How do you balance that differential between the administrative things you have to do and just the pure music?
Well, luckily, I have an amazing managing director, Asia Burrell Wood, who's an ethnomusicologist. She also teaches a class, Jazz, Gender, and Society, which is a liberal arts class at Berklee. She's from Detroit.
Yes, of
Shout
course.
out to
Know her
Detroit.
well. She's awesome. Yeah.
So she really handles a lot of the admin work, and I'm allowed to, kind of be the big picture thinker, which is great for me. I do that part well. But yeah, there's definitely a little more admin work than before I started the Institute. And I just have to keep a balance between my professional life as a musician, my desires as a composer and producer, and all the other things that I like to do, and this institute. And it's definitely a balancing act. And I'm always working, so I have to
Right.
force myself to not work and take care of myself in other ways.
So unfortunately, we're just about out of time, but wanted to kind of ask, in terms of that, taking care of yourself, right? Because of all of this work you're doing and all of this success, you're extremely busy. So how do you kind of keep that, that sense of yourself going when the institutes are calling for things, when various programs, other musicians, sometimes I know we can sometimes feel like people need all of these different things from me as I'm doing things. How do you find you're able to center yourself and keep yourself in the midst of all of these obligations and work that you're doing?
Well, I think that I get so much joy from the work that I do that I never feel like it's a burden. And I feel like it keeps me on the pulse of what's happening in my field. And I feel like it feeds me more than it takes anything away from me. So I'm generally excited about all that I'm doing and have to just, figure out what the priority is, each day. And that's been, I think, the big thing, because I've never been the most organized person in the world. I have a lot going on in my head, and that's kind of where, it stays. And now I'm realizing, oh my God, I really have to organize this better, because so much is happening now that I can't have as much in my head anymore. But that's the other good thing about having support of the university, of the college. Berklee is a great place to work, because they're very supportive of what we're doing. And of course, Asia, and I also have an amazing advisory board with Angela Davis and Gina Dent, Sarah Jasmine Griffin, Carrie Mae Weems. So there's a lot of people around me that I can call for help, and that's very important. But right now during this COVID thing, I'm trying to make sure I take a walk, a couple miles, 2 or 3 miles every day, just to clear my head and to just move, because there's so much sitting at the computer now. And I try to eat well. I like to cook, so it's cooking a lot of vegan recipes.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, just as we go out, what would you say, what's your favorite dish that you like to cook?
Okay, let's see. Well, I said I'm cooking a lot of vegan recipes, which I am, but I love to cook sea bass as well. So that's one of my specialties. And I've recently subscribed to the Purple Carrot, which sends you all the ingredients to cook various dishes with, tempeh and tofu, but also just, vegetable dishes too. So that's been a lot of fun during COVID, all these new recipes.
Nice. Awesome. Awesome. Well, Terri Lyne Carrington, you truly are one of the great arts engines who is powering human creativity in our field. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.